Revolutionary lovers, lovers of love. What a joy and a blessing it is to be invited to be among you here at Middle Church. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Valerie. And here we are on the 100th day, gathered in a time of great pain, but in this moment, also a moment of great joy, because in this moment, we hold sacred space for each other in this love as doers of the word. Outside this clearing, the whole world is shaking. We are living in a time of war and violence, and amidst rumors and threats of increasing war and violence against women and children, against difference, and against the entire natural world. Such systemic evil requires redress. But let's take 1 minute to come to stillness. If you would, please just put your feet on the floor. And follow the sound into silence. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. Breathe in peace. Breathe out love. And what have we been doing? Come back, come back. What have we been doing? We have been co-inspiring, breathing together to embody revolutionary love right here, right now, as we ask the question of how best do we embody revolutionary love in facing our opponents, in facing those who make war and oppose peace, those who lie, misrepresent, annihilate, and place profit over the well-being of living things, living landscapes, living seas. At the same time, I take very seriously Darnell's point. And the last panel was so lovely. There's so much response brewing in me. Darnell's point that we can be at once the site of oppression, the victim of oppression, and the oppressor. Everyone knows that peace has to begin with oneself, but not many people know how to do it. Thich Nhat Hanh, shown here with Martin Luther King. How do we sustain the biblical gifts of the Spirit, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control in the face of insult and injury to ourselves and others? How is it possible to see and resist systemic evil and remain centered in one's own grounded spiritual ecology as the ordinary aggressions faced by vulnerable individuals and groups continue? When our waking and sleeping energies are absorbed by responding to aggressions great and small, our hearts become brittle, or they can become brittle, and we can lose our capacity to hold that revolutionary love for ourselves and for all that we hold dear. Because as all the great teachers have taught us, compassion begins at home. We must give our hearts ease. If we can govern our pain and meet our grief and loss with compassion, perhaps we can begin to mend. This is a heuristic for some of the work done by the Braxton Institute involving collective restoration, collective deliberation, and collective healing around moral conscience, when it can be found and identified, using the spiritual disciplines of discernment, narrative and aesthetic reflection, spirituality, art and creativity, and especially ritual and embodiment, such as singing. The experience of persons of African descent in this country has much to teach about spirituality and health, and about struggle and praise, about survival and thriving. For it's not enough to survive. There must be joy even in the midst of struggle. Even as we struggle to stay aware and awake, to stay woke. The experience of African American people can teach us much about avoiding psychological identification with the will of the master and how to stay well in the process, about aesthetics and spirituality woven together in the tight nexus of a single song, the song you carry with you into battle. Something to teach about generosity and compassion under fire, when the same battle must be fought and won over and over again. Because this outrage has been lived through before, beginning with the slave trade. And we have a long list of names of those who have been murdered. And already, when Eleanor Bumpurs was shot and killed by policemen in her home because she was behind 1 month on her rent, already there was a long list of names of Black folk who had been killed by police. So despite the stony road we trod, we live in covenantal relation with those who have lived before us. Suffering what we have suffered might suffer at any moment, and far worse. And still they rose. How did they survive and thrive? 3 things. 1, they sang. 2, they formed communities of resistance, as you are forming here, in this space cleared by Jackie, the way Baby Suggs cleared space at the clearing in Beloved. Song has the power to lift, to heal, and to create community spaces. Speaking historically, Black song has offered sophisticated modes of analysis and healing. In times of trouble, we have turned not only to our preachers and our politicians, but also to our song leaders and our poets. I want to say a bit back to Yara. You know, I have an office on Capitol Hill. I run into those congressmen on the subway. And some days, like the day they were going to vote on the Affordable Care Act, maybe, I walk up to one. They have their little pins on, so you know. Everybody's praying for you. But there was one day I walked around the corner to the Presbyterian church because Reverend Williams was there to deliver a moral declaration to Mitch McConnell about Mr. Sessions. And I was one of the last to arrive on the steps of the Presbyterian church. So I was at the back of the crowd. And people spoke brave, courageous words of strong analysis that echoed words I had heard Reverend Barber speak earlier. When they start fighting back, you know you are winning. And with those words, I have been encouraged. Now, I have now sung with Yara in 2 states and the District of Columbia, and I have a feeling that there are more states to be added to this list. But you know, when Yara says, "Don't let me down," she's just training you for what she's going to ask you to do next. Because on that day, we marched into the Senate office building, 500 religious leaders. And we dropped to our knees after Reverend Barber read the moral declaration outside Mitch McConnell's office. Tracy, are you here? Well, I want you all to know that I was afraid. I was afraid. But Reverend Barber said, "No one is going to jail today." All right? And Yara sang. And we'll come back to this because there's something that Audre Lorde said. But in this moment, there's the question of spirit murder. It's not just enough to annihilate the physical body. There's the question of the annihilation of the spirit. Here was a woman, 66 years old, who was 1 month behind on her rent. And she may not even have been served a document notifying her she was about to be evicted before multiple policemen arrived at her doors with plastic shields and shotguns. It's been going on a long time, folks. It is imperative that Americans, all Americans, recognize the imprint of the first Africans brought here and the first white women brought here in bondage. I'm trying to say that the word slavery and the term enslavement has lost so much of its weight until people mouth the words without realizing what they're saying, what they're calling up. We have not moved on. We have made some steps toward fair play, but we have not really moved on. It is ignorant, not wise, to think that we can get on without remembering what happened, who did what to whom, to what success, and for what reasons. It's Dr. Maya Angelou. It's a phone interview that we did together about a year and a half before she joined the Ancestors. So I'm going to just flip through some of these as I talk, and maybe you can listen to me and follow some of the slides as well. But dispersal after dispersal in the African American experience has created many impacts. The policy around urban renewal, urban removal, root shock, the weathering effect, which is accelerated biological aging as a result of environmental racism, toxic waste, police violence, moral injury in war, spirit murder, and related mortality rates. If you understand these things, you begin to understand African American health disparities, which are also related to the use of Black neighborhoods as dumping grounds for toxic waste. This is the research that I'm involved in at the Library of Congress. So through all of these eras, these are some of the things that Black folks have experienced. Now, integration brought people together in an organic relationship. And as a result, our churches were burned and bombed. And it was not enough to burn and bomb and kill these young ladies. I don't know if you've seen the movie Four Young Girls by Spike Lee, but if you did, you know that the degradation went on as their bodies were photographed after they were killed. And the Charleston Nine. Churches are attacked because they are the foundation of the Black struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. And here is the question: what does forgiveness mean? It means, if you kill me, I will rise again. And I love that picture of Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King. And they grew close together because of the practice of mindfulness, which has so much potential. Thich Nhat Hanh says, mindfulness is the miracle by which we master and restore ourselves, and this we must do continually if we are to love ourselves so that we can distance ourselves from our own anger and potential hate. I went back and reread Martin Luther King's 17 November 1957 sermon on loving the enemy. He's not talking about loving the enemy. He's talking about not hating the enemy. And he says he had to preach this sermon at least once a year. He goes on to talk about the three different kinds of love: eros, philia, and agape. What kind of love do we want to offer the enemy? I suggest to you that it is not the kind where we are bound in psychological identification with the enemy. I suggest to you that there are moments when the 11th mindfulness training comes into play. And here's what it is. Aware that great violence and injustice have been done to the environment and society, I am committed not to live with a vocation that is harmful to humans and nature. I will do my best to select a livelihood that helps realize my ideal of understanding and compassion. Aware of global economic, political, and social realities, I will behave responsibly as a consumer and as a citizen, not investing in companies that deprive others of their chance to live. I think I went the wrong way. So, to come back to song, as I said, in times of trouble, we have turned not only to our preachers and our politicians, but also to our song leaders and poets. In the Black spiritual, God is always on the side of the oppressed. This awareness is part of what enabled Frederick Douglass to resist enslavement, whip the slave breaker, and escape to freedom. And it makes sense in light of contemporary studies of collective trauma and healing. Now, this is what Jack Saul, Dr. Jack Saul of this city, Columbia University School of Public Health, has to say about trauma. He says that while trauma takes away a person's agency, co-creative acts offer the opportunity for bearing witness in relation to others, which in turn establish archives and therapeutic contexts from which new justice-making contexts arise. So while we are weathering in the struggle, and if you're a woman of color in your 40s, on the cellular level, there's a good chance you're about 7 years older than your white female friend in the same economic group. Stay in the storm. Stay in the struggle. Because we can sing, we can build communities of resistance, we can love one another, and in the words of Audre Lorde, we can learn to work when we are afraid the same way we have learned to work when we are tired. Thank you.